All right, so let's finish off product rule. So below are graphs of two functions, f of x and g of x. Let p of x equals f of x times g of x. R of x equals x squared times d of x. Use the graphs to answer the questions that follow. So this is some really good AP style questions, which is why I paused the tape and started over, so we're all fresh. Although I'm not that fresh because I just finished taping the last one. But I'm still ready to go. So if g prime of -4 equals 2, what's the value of p prime of -4? Let's remind ourselves what p prime is. All right, so, or what p of x is. So, whoops, p of x is f of x times g of x. So p prime of x is going to be, so we got to find p prime of x first, and then we can find p prime of -4. We got a product rule. It's going to be the first times the derivative of the second times g prime of x plus the second, g of x, times the derivative of the first, f prime of x. All right? So let's get this all squared up, and then we can find p prime of -4. All right, so we already know, we got some information on g prime there. All right, we need, and actually, I'm sorry, we are going to need to just plug in values at this point, because it's not like we have functions to deal with. So that's as much simplifying as we can do in terms of the equation. Now we need to actually plug in, because we're not dealing with a function where we have terms to combine. We just need to use the product rule properly. Right? So let's find all of our parts. Right? So anytime you have the derivative of a product, remember you've got to use the product rule. It doesn't matter if all you've got is f of x and g of x. All right? Set up the product rule and then plug in your values. All right? So f of x. All right? So, or excuse me, f of -4. Not f of x, f of -4. Let's actually write in the -4s. Okay, there we go. All right, so f of -4. All right, well, you just go to the graph. F of -4 is -1. All right, now we need g prime of -4. And they told us that. That's 2. All right, so now we need g of -4. And we just come on over here, g prime of -4 is 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that thing's a 4. Right here. And that would be 6. And the last thing we need is f prime of -4. And you might be thinking, hey, they didn't give us f prime of -4. Except we have f of x, and f prime of -4, remember, is just the slope of f of x when x equals -4. And they were kind enough to make sure it was a line, and a really easy line to figure out. Right? So our slope is 1. So that means f prime of -4 is just 1. All right, so p prime of -4 is equal to -1 times 2 plus 6 times 1. And so the only difficult thing in these problems is the correct setup, using the correct formula. Right, not just saying, oh, I'm just going to multiply values together. No, you got to use the product rule. And then finding your values and choosing those correctly. So we've got -2 plus 6. That's going to be a 4. Right, 6 minus 2. That's going to be a 4. All right, and so what does that mean? P prime of -4 is 4. All right, so that's the slope of f of x times g of x at x equals -4. All right, let's take care of the second one here. All right, so r prime, we want r prime of -2. All right, so r of x, let's write that down. R of x is x squared times g of x. All right, so if we want, r prime of x, that's going to, we have to use the product rule. That's a product. So we have the first of x plus the second, g of x, times the derivative of the first. Right? So derivative of x squared is 2x. All right, so now we need to get all our values. All right, well, x is probably the easiest thing to figure out. It's -2. They gave us that one, right? It's everywhere. Right, so that was an easy one to figure out. Now we need g prime of x. Or excuse me, now we have to, sorry about that. Well, x is -2, but I forgot to change that to -2. So we remembered what we were looking for. So x squared times g prime of -2 plus g of -2 plus, and then I suppose actually I could just replace the x at this point with a -2. -2 squared. All right, and so we got -2 squared times g prime of -2 plus g of -2 plus 2 times -2. May as well just plug in the -2 for the x's. All right, so we took care of x's. Now we need g prime of -2, which we don't have. But we do have r prime of -2. That's 20. And g of -2, that is right here. And what is that? Oh, one, that looks like a -3. Just by counting boxes. All right, so g of -2 is -3. And that's all we need to find g prime of -2. All right, so 20 equals, that's going to be a 4 times g prime of -2 is what we're looking for, plus -3. And then somehow my multiplication became a plus, but that's 2 times -2. All right, so that's going to be -3 times -4. Yes, because g prime of -2 is -3, and 2x is -4. All right, so now to simplify it now, 20 equals 4 times g prime of -2 plus 12. Subtract 12 from both sides. 8 is 4 times g prime of -2. And I'm running out of space, but if you divide both sides by 4, g prime of -2 is 2. What's my answer up here? G prime of -2 is 2. All we had to do was divide both sides by 4. Here, I'll do that. And there we go. All right, so not difficult problems. You just have to know how to set them up. And these are common problems for an AP test. And good thinking problems. This has to do with the problems we just did, but they didn't fit on that page. Find the equation of the tangent line to the graph of p of x when x equals -4. We have our, so we know what x is. X is -4. And p of x, that was this one over here. And p of x is f of x times g of x. Right? So we need p of 4. I'll find it over here. I probably color code. All right, so we need p of 4 for the next part. So p of 4 is just going to be f of 4 times g of 4. Right? There's no product rule, and you're just evaluating a function. So f of 4, oh, excuse me, -4. Maybe that did seem right. F of -4 is right where we have a dot there, -1. So that's a -1. And g of -4, we have a dot, and that was, actually we have it written down, don't we, at 6. So we got -1 times 6, so that's going to be -6. That's our y value. And we found the slope. The slope is 4. Right, so we have -4, is that -6 or positive? So we have the point, -4, -6. Our slope was +4. So that's going to be y plus 6 equals 4 times x plus 4. And you can just move the 6 over, and you can distribute and put it in slope-intercept form if you like, but this is also fine. And there we go. There's the slope of the tangent line. Let's do the same thing over here. We just need the points. All right, so it's when we want x is -2, and r of x was x squared times g of x. All right, so r of -2 is -2 squared times g of -2, which is going to be 4 times, and g of -2 was -3. So that's a -12. All right, so our point is -2, -12, and the slope is 2. And that gives us y, I'm going to write it down, -2, -12, and a slope of 2. So y plus 12, I got all this space over here. Y plus 12 equals 2 times x plus 2, or y equals, 2 times x plus 2 minus 12. There we go. Another one done. Lots of good tying back to what the derivative is, and lots of nice solving in this lesson. All right, so let's deal with the table. We got like about 4 of these. So let f of x and g of x be differentiable functions such that the following values are true. All right, so we got x values, right? And then here we're evaluating the function f of x, g of x, and then we got f prime of x and g prime of x. All right, so remember f of x and f prime of x and g prime of x, these are slopes for given x values for f of x and g of x, right? One's for f of x, one's for g of x. We want to estimate the value of f prime of 3.5. Good question. I see it every year on the AP test. Notice there's no 3.5 here. All right, so what estimates the derivative? The secant line, right? So the slope of the secant line estimates the tangent line, or you can think of it as average rate of change estimates instantaneous rate of change, right? So you need to use 2 values that are on either side, and you want to be as close as possible because you want this to be a good estimate, not a crummy estimate. All right, so 3.5 is sandwiched right there. All right, so there's our x values. This was f prime of 3.5. So f prime of 3.5 is approximately, all right, so these are the y values here. So we're going to use these y values. -2 minus 1 divided by 3 minus 4. And that's going to be -3 divided by -1. And that's just +3. -2 minus 1, 3 minus 4. Yep. I don't know why I didn't write down instead of up the column there. All right, so remember, you just find the slope of your secant line, and so you're going to use values as close to 3.5 as possible to estimate f prime of 3.5. Right? Lots of good problems here. All right, so q of x equals 2 times f of x minus 4 times g of x. What's the value of q prime of 4? Right? So, are these product rules? No. All right, so product rule, I mean, you could technically use a product rule, but we use product rules for function times function, not for scalar multiple times function, right? So you don't need the product rule for a scalar multiple times a function. Right? It's just constant multiple rule. So we don't have to knock ourselves out on this one. All right, so we want the derivative. So q prime of x is just going to be 2 times f prime of x minus 4 times g prime of x. It's just constant multiple and sum and difference. So q prime of x, and we want q prime of 4. So q prime of 4 is 2 times, just follow along here, and so here's 2. 2 times 2 minus 4 times negative 3. That's all there is to this one. Q prime of 4 is 4 plus 12, and so that's going to be 16. All right, so if it's just a function times a scalar multiple, it's just fine in the derivative, and we have a table of values. It has the derivative here, so all we had to do is multiply 2 times the derivative and negative 4 times the derivative. That wasn't so bad. Same values, right? I just copied the table again. All right, so now we have p of x equals negative 2 times f of x times g of x. What's the value of p prime of 3? Right? So now we need the product rule, because it's not just a scalar multiple. Right? So p of x, or excuse me, p prime of x, you could just keep the negative 2 with the f of x, make that one term. That'd be probably the easiest thing to do. So you're going to have negative 2 f of x, and then, or, you know what you could do, and actually I think I'm going to do that in this case. Instead, let's just use the product rule for that part. All right, so we have equals negative 2 times, all right, so we have f of x times the derivative g of x plus g of x times the derivative of f of x. Yeah. So p prime, and we want p prime of 3, because now we're going to have to start plugging in values, because that's all the simplifying we can do, is negative 2 times, right? So I'm going to write all the values here. F of 3, g prime of 3, plus g of 3 times f prime of 3. So p prime of 3 is negative 2. G of 3 is negative 2. G prime of 3 is 2, plus g of 3 is negative 3, and f prime of 3 is negative 4. So notice we used everybody. And I have to remember to close my parentheses. So p prime of 3 is negative 2 times negative 4 plus 12, right, which would be negative 2 times 8 or negative 16. Right? And so that is the slope of that particular product when x is 3. The last one. Find the equation of the tangent, I think it's the last one. Find the equation of the tangent line, maybe there's one more, to the graph of v of x equals x cubed times f of x when x equals negative 1. Again, this will be a product rule. All right, so x, and just a little reminder there, the derivative of x cubed is 3x squared. All right, so v prime of x is going to be the first, x cubed, times the derivative of the second, so f prime of x, and then plus the second, f of x, times the derivative of the first, so times 3x squared. All right, and now we want v prime of negative 1, and that's going to be negative 1 cubed. Let's get rid of these. F prime of negative 1 is 1, plus f of 1 is 2, times 3 times negative 1 squared. I feel like I'm missing a parentheses. There we go. So v prime of negative 1 is going to be negative 1. Right? Negative 1 cubed times 1 is negative 1. And then plus, that's going to be 2 times 3 times 1. And so that's just going to be a 6. So v prime of negative 1 equals negative 1 plus 6, which is 5. So all of these were slopes. Oh, we're not done yet, because we want to find the equation of the tangent line. Right? So always make sure you look back and make sure you answered your question. But what I was saying is all of these have been slopes. Right? We're evaluating the derivative. That's the slope. Right? And some of these have required the product rule. Right? So when x is negative 1, we know we have our point, negative 1, 2, and our slope is 5. So y minus 2 equals 5 times x plus 1, and then you can just isolate y. 5 times x plus 1 plus 2, and this one is done. And we have one more and two more. Wait, did we not already do these problems? Yes, we did. I must have put the same problems on twice. Okay, and then that one is for the near pi. So this one is on twice. Hopefully they're in the right order in your notes. But this one is our last problem right here. All right, so same table. So k of x is equal to, so we got a product rule here, 2 times f of x plus 3 times 3 minus g of x. Ooh, nice big product rule. All right, so k prime of x, right? So it's going to be the, we got to use the product rule. It's going to be the first, right? So the first is going to be, and actually, do I want to, it might be easier. Well, you know, we could do this one of two ways. We could multiply it out, or we could use the product rule. Let's use the product rule, and then maybe we'll solve it the second way. All right, so the first would be 2f of x plus 3 times the derivative of the second. Right, so maybe we'll just solve it one way. I don't know. The derivative, maybe in class we'll solve it the second way. The derivative of 3 minus gx is going to be, so the derivative of 3 is 0. The derivative of negative g of x is going to be negative g prime of x. Thanks. It's got a scalar multiple. All right, so the first times the derivative of the second is going to be negative g prime of x. This might not be so bad. Plus the second, which is 3 minus g of x, plus the derivative of the first. All right, so the derivative, yeah, I think I do like multiplying this out, or just using the product rule rather than multiplying it out. The derivative of 2f of x plus 3, right? So the derivative of 2f of x is going to be 2f prime of x, and the derivative of 3 is just 0. So these derivatives aren't that bad. So 2 times f prime of x. All right, so now all I got to do is finish solving. All right, so k prime of 3. All right, so we have 2 times f of x, and actually let's plug in the value, excuse me, f of 3 plus 3 times negative g prime of 3 plus 3 minus g of 3 times 2f prime of 3. A lot easier. We got, always make sure you substitute. All right. K prime of 3 is equal to 2 times f of 3 is right here, negative 2 plus 3, I need parentheses around that because we're going to multiply that whole thing, times, because we're not leaving parentheses off again, not leaving parentheses off, and we're not dropping coefficients. Negative g prime of 3, so that's going to be negative. G prime of 3 is right here, so that's going to be negative 2, plus 3 minus g of 3. G of 3 is negative 3, times 2 times f prime of 3 is negative 4. All right, so now we got to do is multiply and add some numbers together. Negative 4 plus 3 is going to be a negative 1 times a negative 2 plus 3 minus a negative 3, that's going to be 6 times, and 2 times negative 4, that's going to be a negative 8. A lot of parentheses there. I think I have too many parentheses. What does this one go to? I don't know. So k prime of 3 is equal to 2 minus 14, and so that's going to be negative 2. And all we did is we found the slope of the tangent line, right? But this was a little bit trickier one because we had a little bit trickier product. But you see, it's not too bad at all. All right, so that's all I've got on the product rule for the past hour and a half. And so I hope you've makes sense to you, and hope you appreciated some of these problems using tables and graphs, mixing it up a little bit, going back to the what does the derivative even mean, and that's the end of my podcast and the end of this in your pod. And so now you can do the problems in your packet, and they're problems 1 through 12. All right, 1 through 12, and they're the ones that say homework on it. I think it's like 2 pages. All right, so bye for now.